Hi everyone, so welcome to chapter 6 of the book of Enoch. Previously I have done the video translation of an audio translation of chapters 1 to 5, where we talked about certain things that were to come in the end times and the judgment that was to come in the very end. I've also done a commentary on chapters 1 to 5 where I've talked about my translation of what I perceived or gathered from chapters 1 to 5. So this is chapter 6, the commentary for chapter 6. And this is where my personal favorite bits begin, because it begins to talk about a certain part of history that was not expanded on too much in the Bible. Enoch begins to expand upon this and give us some ideas of what it was like in the very early days of humanity, in relation to the garden, to the fallen angels, to the Nephilim and the rest of the giants, and to the fall of man, and eventually to the wipeout in the days of Noah. So here is the read up for chapter 6. And it came to pass that when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. So I understand the children of man here to mean in the time post Adam. So there are theories on exactly what was happening in the time of when Adam was created in terms of the garden versus outside of the garden, and if there was a civilization or if there was not, and certain translations and proper readings of what was mentioned in the creation story. So especially where Cain is concerned, and also where who he married and who he was afraid of when he was sent out after his sin. And also, I think the Book of the Giants or the Book of Adam and Eve or something like that covers certain aspects of this. However, there are questions as to which parts of the apocryphal books are to be considered. So we know that the Bible as it stands was sat down, a group of people sat down and decided what to include and what to remove. The Council of Nicaea, which has made it a little bit confusing for people to consider extra biblical or what could have been biblical but was removed. And also, because especially where I think Enoch is talked about in the Bible, and the book of Enoch, for instance, kind of marries to what has been said in the Bible, that raises questions as to what exactly happened in history and how do we move forward with the knowledge that we had and the knowledge that we're getting now, how to sift through them. So I perceive the children of men here to mean post-Adam and the children that were born. Possibly could be also if there were indeed a civilization outside of the garden before Adam was sent out, then it could be that as well. But it says the children of men, so I'm inclined to believe that it's referring to some relation to the generation of Adam, but could be others as well. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said unto one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. So the children of the heavens, so these are the angels, that I gather were supposed to have a sort of duty, so possibly watching duty, so possibly watchers that were supposed to be watching over the earth in some way, so that the daughters were beautiful and lusted after them. So questions that are raised here are, what's the nature of the angels after all, and how did they lust after the children of men? How were they created? Did they have such feelings, or were they tempted by the original falling ones? the original fallen one. So we know that Satan had a war with Michael in heaven before he was cast down with his angels. So the war was between Michael and his angels and Satan and his angels, Lucifer. So I'm presuming this happened before this fall, and that perhaps certain aspects that crop up may point to these angels being tempted by the same way everything else was tempted that fell. So the same way perhaps Satan was able to go and question some of the angels that went with him in the war, and get them to be on his side. Could it be that that's how these angels were tempted with these women, in the same manner that Yahshua was tempted on the mountains by Satan again, who tried to tell him to bow down and worship him? These are sort of things that are coming up to me when I read this. So these watchers, or these angels, were supposed to be watching over something, and they looked and they saw the women, and they kind of started to lust after them, and wanted to go down and be with them. So beget children, two things that crop up are, is it through sleeping with them, or is there an element of genetic modification scientifically that happened? So what I mean is, did they transform into humans and slept with them, because we know angels can transform, or did they just manipulate their DNA, the women's DNA, or carry out experiments on them to get them pregnant, so mixing them, the angels' DNA, with the daughter's DNA in a scientific way rather than sleeping with them? We don't really know, but the last aspect tells me that possibly they did sleep with them. If that's the case, then are angels able to, if they wanted to? Is that the aspect of free will that causes some of them to choose to remain with their role as they were created by Yah, and the other ones to choose to deviate and explore other things for themselves? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And Semyaza, who was their leader, I picture Semyaza being the ultimate leader of these angels that came down on the women, said unto them, I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. So of course they knew it was a sin. Of course they knew it was a deviation. Of course they knew that this is not something that they were supposed to do. So it looks like they consciously decided to do this. And Semyaza, being the leader, was probably scared that he might be blamed for it, and the others may blame him, unless there was some kind of pact that said that they would all take the blame, which it looks like is what was happening here. And they all answered him and said, let us all swear an oath, and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecation, which is mutual judgment, should there be one, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. So they said, it's okay, Semyaza, we'll do it, and we'll swear an oath with you. So it looks like swearing was a very important aspect of universal laws. I presume if they could do this, and the leader would be fine with it. Then swear them all together and bound themselves by mutual imprecation upon it. And they were all 200 who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecation upon it. So this alludes to this happening in the days of Jared, which then alludes to it being in the days of post Adam and Eve being cast out of the garden, and the genealogy of Adam and Eve. Jared is one that was born under those genealogies, which marries again with Enoch, because there are a few mentions of Enoch And there is an Enoch that was born to Cain. I'm going to go back to Genesis in a second to expand upon this. And then there was another Enoch that was born to Jared. So we're going to go into Genesis now to have a look at that. So here are some mentions of Enoch in Genesis. So we have Genesis 5, where Enoch, I believe this Enoch is who the book of Enoch talks about. He begat Methuselah. And the book of Enoch was the Enoch who was righteous, walked with God, and was not, because God took him. And I believe that God took him part is what he talks about in the book of Enoch, where he was taken to, what he saw, and what he was supposed to tell us. Rather than it being this second section, which is the Enoch that was born to Cain. This Enoch was born to Cain earlier on, and the book of Enoch, as you can see with the third line here, was born to Jared. So we're going to go into that chapter and read Genesis 5, chapter 18. And Jared lived 160 and 2 years and begat Enoch. And Jared lived after he begat Enoch 800 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Jared were 960 and 2 years, and he died. And Enoch lived 65 years, so 65 years Enoch was, and begat Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters. So that's 365 years total. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. So this is where the book of Enoch must have stemmed from, when God took him up with him and showed him all the things that were to come, and the history of man, essentially adding on to what was mentioned in Genesis about the giants, which I'm going to go into in a sec as well. So this is to clarify that the book of Enoch seems to refer to the Enoch who was born to Jared, and so it makes sense that Enoch says in the days of Jared is when the sons came down upon the daughters of. So these would have been the daughters that, it seems, part of these daughters would have been the daughters that were born to Adam, Seth, Enoch, Methuselah, Mahalaleel, Jared even. So that seems to make sense. So let me go back to Enoch, and it's also mentioned in Jude that Enoch also, the seventh from Adam. So it definitely is referring to the Enoch that came from Jared, prophesied of these. So I'm reading here Jude chapter 1 verse 14. Prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his angels. So this again is alluded to in the book of Enoch, which we'll go on to read eventually with the series. So Luke also mentioned which was the son of Methuselah, which was the son of Enoch. So Methuselah was the son of Enoch, and this again is the same Enoch that was the son of Jared, who was the son of Mahalaleel. And it says here in Hebrew 11:15, by faith Enoch was translated, that he should not see death, and was not found, because God had translated him from before. For before his translation, I'm going to go into that and read more. He pleased God. So again, this seems to be alluding to the Enoch from the book of Enoch. So that was from Jude, or Hebrews chapter 11 verse 5. So Enoch basically pleased God because he was faithful. And for us current children of God, it kind of leads to the question, faithfulness. What does it mean, and how does it please God in the daily living? Is it possible for us to get to a point where we have the same characteristics that please God, that enabled him to bless Enoch with such a beautiful experience? So when Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and he dwelt in the land of Nod, who named it Nod? Why was it named Nod? Were the people in Nod? These are the questions that lead others to believe that there might have been a civilization that were perhaps where or may not have been made in the exact image of Yah as we were made. So we that came from Adam were made in his image and likeness. So again, it kind of opens up more questions about the fallen angels, what happened in those days, and what if there was indeed a civilization, why has it been hidden, and what's the information on these. I'm going to talk more about this in future videos so as to not go too far from this topic. The final thing to look at is the giants. So the book of Enoch expands on this aspect of Genesis. Genesis chapter 6 verse 4. And there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, and the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Some of these men are the Nephilim and the other names for these giants, and potentially also one of these giants are the ones that were seen and considered higher, making the children of God look like grasshoppers, and also the giant that potentially the giant that fought with David, so Goliath. And these are the names of their leaders: Samelzaz, their leader; Arakalba, Ramiel; Kokabel, Tamlel, Ramlel, Danel, Ezekiel, Barakijal, Azael, Amaros, Batarel, Ananel, Zachleel, Samzapil, Satrael, Turel, Jomjael, and Sariel. These are the chiefs. They're chiefs of tens. So I did the calculation. There were 200 angels that came to these women. It said earlier on that Semyaza was their leader. So I'm considering Semyaza as their ultimate leader. So that would be one angel, and then it will be 199 angels under Semyaza. And then when it goes on to talk about the chiefs of the 10, it mentions Samlazaz as their leader. So I'm considering Samlazaz as the next leader after Semyaza, so potentially deputy leader, and also considering him potentially as the leader of the chiefs of the tens. So that would be the second, and then it will be 298. So that then leaves 10 angels, each set of 10 with one leader, and that came as 18 groups of 10 angels, each 10 with a leader, and the total adds up to 200. So for a while I had considered this and tried to figure it out, because if you can see, it mentions 19 angels, chief angels after Semyaza, and then plus Semyaza would be 20. So I was always wondering, how come it mentions 19 angels and not 20? But so I had to do the calculation, and it makes sense. So another thing I noticed is that most of the angels have the L at the end, which then would seem to say that their name speaks something of the Most High. So the same way Michael is a name that has an L at the end, that talks about a characteristic of Yah, and Gabriel. So some of the angels' names didn't. So that's one question that I would like to look into.